Hello and welcome again to my house here in New Zealand. This is webinar number 22, so I'm back here on the whiteboard. I hope wherever you are, you're well. Here in New Zealand, we seem to be coping quite well, but we'll have to see in the weeks ahead. Hopefully we can keep safe from the virus. So if this is the first time you're watching, my name is Greg. I've been an English teacher for the last 15 years or so. I've been back here in New Zealand for the last 2 years. During that time, I've worked a lot for grade, and I've been an IELTS tutor for a lot of that time as well. So I'm very familiar with the IELTS test, especially after doing a lot of videos and webinars for the grade site. So if this is also the first time you're watching, I just want to explain how this is going to work. Today, as you can see, we're going to look at one of the more difficult parts of the test for all of you, or many of you, which is writing task 2. So today I have a volunteer essay. It's actually the same essay topic or the same essay task that we covered in webinar 1. So today we're going to look at a different volunteered essay, but it's answering it from a different angle. So a little bit of review from all that time ago, back at the end of March. We're going to revisit that essay, look at a different submission, and I'm going to give some feedback to the student. So during that time, if you're watching live, you can ask questions via the grade Facebook page. And I have my screen up and I'll be able to see your questions. If I can answer them immediately, I will. Otherwise, I will always make sure I answer any questions by the end of the webinar. So what I'll do first is I will reveal the task. If you did see the first webinar, it's the same one, but I'll give you a chance to read the question. So let me read that out for you if you have any problems seeing at home. Some people believe that the government spends too much money on the arts and that it should spend more on other things. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this view? So again, we did this one all that time ago during webinar 1. The other thing I should add is if you do have a copy of the IELTS band descriptors available, whether it's a soft copy or a hard copy, that'll definitely help. So obviously the task here is agree or disagree. When we looked at this essay the first time, we had a student who agreed with this statement, right? And that student focused on why the government should spend money on other things. Today I'm going to reveal an essay where the student actually disagrees. And this student's essay is actually defending the arts, right? So I think the essay does need a lot of work, but that's what I'm here for. And we're going to go through, have a look at some of the components of the band descriptors and try and improve the essay. So at home, I'll let you read this essay, then we'll move on to the feedback. Okay, if you do need more time, let me know via Facebook on the grade Facebook page. But I'm going to flip to the next page. This is actually quite a short essay. There are 3 pages of A1 in total. Just remember, as I give feedback, you'll be able to read this again. So I'm going to go to the next page. Okay, and here's the final page. Okay, hopefully now, having seen a lot of these webinars, and we focused a lot when I started this series of webinars on writing task 2, hopefully you have some ideas how you can improve this essay as well. There are some good parts, or some good points to it, but let's start with the introduction. Okay, when we look at the introduction, we want to focus on the statement that the examiner has given us. So what I mean by that is, this is the statement. So it's been a while, but I wonder if you can remember what I mean by the 3 Ps, right? So this is a nice little way of remembering a introduction structure. So 3 Ps is paraphrase, then we want to immediately state our position. So this is something which is mentioned under task response in the band descriptors. So position, and then make that a little easier to read. We want to preview the main points. Let's see how our candidate's done with those 3 Ps. So I think there has been a reasonable attempt at paraphrasing here. Well, there has been an attempt. The question itself says some people believe that, right? So what's happened here is the candidate has changed some people to many people. So some and many actually have different meanings. This is where, if you can remember some of these phrases I've taught you, something like this. Right, so again, the examiner statement says some people. Very common that we see this in the statements that were given by the examiner. Some people can be paraphrased as certain individuals. Then this candidate could avoid having a more awkward expression like many people. So the examiner has used the word think, right? So surely we can think of some other words, some other synonyms for think. Here's one, and we'll see if you can think of the answer at home. So certain individuals, hopefully you answered believe. Definitely keep that, right? So this is our first complex sentence. So we want to keep the complex sentence that the examiner's given us. Now, hopefully if you did see webinar 1, you can remember another way of saying the government, because the examiner has used the expression the government. And again, these kind of really common words, you want to learn some synonyms for these before you take the test. So I'm focusing on the vocabulary right now, but the state, right? So certain individuals believe that the state, and the examiners told us many people believe, or many people think that the government spending, many people sorry, I have made a mistake. The examiner did actually use the word believe. So I will make a heartfelt apology to our candidate because they have actually paraphrased believe to think. So that's well done. Certain individuals think that the state, so the examiner has used the expression, some people believe that the government spends too much money. So this could be paraphrased as the state, right? So now, as you can see, there has been an attempt at paraphrasing, but too many of these words are the same. So at this point, I'm just going to go over this again and show you how I would paraphrase this. So hopefully this is a review if you've watched it, but the other thing I would be doing here is I would change from active voice to passive voice. So so we have here certain individuals think that. I'm going to make this passive, so we're going to talk about the object at the start. The object's going to become the subject here. So here's just a different way than I used in webinar 1. So I think last time I talked about funds. Here I'm just going to go for the budget, right? So that's something which comes to mind. When I think of government spending, I think of the budget. Certain individuals think that too much of the budget is allocated to the arts. Now, this is something that you may have noticed in this essay. It's quite apparent, or we can see, that this candidate has confused the actual meaning, which is a really important one, of the arts, right? So this is where, in our introduction, we can demonstrate to the examiner that we understand what the arts are. So, such as, now, it's not just art is a school subject, but when we talk about the arts, we're talking about things like museums, cultural performances, and statues. Right, so that's just a nice rule of thumb. When you're giving examples in IELTS, you can always give them in lots of 3. And again, we're demonstrating that we fully understand the statement that we're given by the examiner. And we're also demonstrating some more vocabulary, right? So I'll flick back to the actual question. Certain individuals think that too much of the budget is allocated to the arts, such as museums, cultural performances, and statues. So we have 2 parts. And we could reference this. We might even go to the government. Right, so again, I think here the government is going to be one of those focus words. So if you really wanted to, you could probably use authorities, but I think switching between the state and the government should be enough. The government needs to prioritize other areas, right? So instead of saying areas, instead of saying things, I've said areas, right? So Prioritize is a word which I think you have the opportunity to use in many different writing task 2 responses, right? So it just is a nice way of, instead of saying important or more important, prioritize, right? So this is my paraphrasing. Let's go back to the candidate. So again, there has been an attempt to paraphrase, but I think this is something that this candidate needs to work on more. And paraphrasing the statement that you're given is one of the key skills in the IELTS test. Think of it as the first impression, right? So we can move on to position now. So I'm going to highlight the position. Now, I find this position confusing, and that's a problem because we're told in the band descriptors under task response that the position always needs to be clear, right? So the candidate has said that he or she agrees, right? So the government should spend more money on other things, but then art is also important. Actually, this is why I think it's much easier for this essay to agree and then talk about other things, right? So maybe for this person, art is actually important in their life, so they felt it was easier for them to write about. But what's happened here is that the position has become unclear. I'm going to erase the paraphrasing I've done. Now, I think as long as what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to stick to the same position, but I'm going to rewrite this position. Here I might put a contrast. However, I believe that the arts are still very important. Right, so we're asked to agree or disagree. I think in this case, this might be acceptable. It's better than this. At least there's no confusion about agreeing or disagreeing. However, I believe that the arts are still very important. So I'm going to take this as the position. Again, just to qualify what I'm saying, if I actually answered this question in the test, right? We'll put the question up again. If I was actually answering this essay myself in the test, I would, well, any agree, disagree, I tend to take one position or the other. I either completely agree or completely disagree. And I think this is the first big mistake that the student has made, is by focusing on the arts, but still agreeing that other things are important, it makes the position really unclear. And I think in this case, this is possibly the clearest that I can, the clearest way I can think of rewriting their position. So, but we still are missing a preview. Right, so this is what is completely missing from the introduction. The position seems to be that arts is still important. So again, what I've done is I've got rid of anything which is unclear, right? So when this person says they agree, it makes it unclear, but then this candidate is missing the preview of the main points. So there's evidence of a topic sentence here. Even though it's a different form of arts, this person is talking about the subject of art at school. The main idea here is that art makes people creative. So I'll just brainstorm that down here. I'm going to use the noun form creativity. And again, there is evidence of a topic sentence here that art makes cities beautiful. So these two main points need to be included in the introduction. So we could actually make a complex sentence here. So however, I believe that the arts are still very important because they add to creativity. Now, again, I'm just going to imagine this. Imagine I can't think of a good synonym for beautiful. Then what I can do, and I've told you this a few times, is use a different part of speech. So beautiful is the adjective. I'm going to use the verb form, which is beautify. And then here is a synonym for cities, urban areas. Right, so here is the brainstorming, and here is the completion of the introduction, right? So again, I just want to stress, this is not how I would tackle this essay. I would most definitely agree with this statement, and then I would talk about other things. The first time we went through this, I think I mentioned health and education are two things that you could look at. The other reason why I would look at other things and agree with the statement is because you're going to get a bigger range of vocabulary. Here, because this student is just focusing on the arts, he or she is a little more restricted. But let's go through the main body paragraphs. Okay, if you're frantically trying to write down what I've written, just remember this will be replayed at some stage in the future, and it will be uploaded onto the grade Facebook page, and we have a YouTube site as well. So you can find this again. Okay, so this person thinks that the arts are important, and their first main point is that art makes people creative. So straight away, as I mentioned, there's a problem here because this form of art is actually, it appears to be school art, which is a difference from the arts, right? So the arts means the performing arts and all of the way which art in general is presented to the public. So really, this essay, or sorry, this paragraph needs to be rewritten completely. We can go through and still look at it though and look at different aspects, but this is off topic, right? So as soon as you're off topic in the IELTS, it's a big problem, right? So I think it's referred to as a tangent or tangential. So, or it'll come under this part here. So band 5, it suggests that the candidate addresses the task only partially, right? So yeah, which is, in other words, it's off topic, right? So it was not completely related. So I would definitely recommend rewriting this paragraph. And I'll look at some other ideas later, but let's go through and have a look at other aspects of the paragraph. So we can see here, art makes people creative. That's quite a common mistake where an extra auxiliary has been added. So Right, so just to give some more feedback to the student, this auxiliary is not necessary because makes in this case is the main verb, right? So you don't need to add in a be verb here. So school kids. I think it's okay to use a few informal words or expressions in your essay, but I would probably always recommend using more formal academic type words if you can. So surely this candidate will be familiar with the word children. This would be a better word choice than kids. So school kids do art in school and their paintbrushes are expensive. Okay, so what also strikes me about this essay is I think it's quite likely that this candidate hasn't really planned out what they're going to write. So the first point to support the this main body paragraph is that art makes people creative, but art supplies in school are very expensive. So you can see how it's starting to go off topic, because this is not about school. Some parents poor, right? So that needs to be poor is an adjective. So here we're actually missing the be verb. So this needs to be some parents are poor. Now, also I noticed that this student switches between government and the government. Just be consistent and say the government, right? It doesn't matter what government you're talking about. If you're in India and you're writing the exam, you can imagine you're talking about the Indian government. If you're in Pakistan and you're writing about the government, then for you, it could mean the Pakistani government. So, but I think it's always going to be better with the definite article the. So some parents are poor, so the government must spend the money for poor parents. So again, not a wide range of vocabulary because spend is actually used by the examiner, and just a repetition of the same phrase. So some parents are poor and then poor parents. So this is where this is the end of that sentence. I just want to point out some ways to help with referencing, right? So instead of saying poor parents, this is where we can use referencing, right? So again, I think this entire paragraph should be rewritten, but I just want to use this as an example to give some feedback about vocabulary and grammar. Referencing often comes under cohesion and coherence. So that will improve the score for cohesion and coherence if you reference poor parents as them, and it will also mean that you're not going to get deducted for repeating the same terms. Maybe one day a poor kid, so again, poor. Poor is spelt wrong, and so far we've seen the word poor 3 times. That is definitely something that the examiner will pick up on. Kid has been used again. So this is where every essay we're going to talk about people. So what do we call children who go to school, right? So a lot of people struggle to think of other words for people. So don't think about people, think about what type of people. So kids who go to school are students, right? Right, so maybe one day a poor student. So again, poor. Underprivileged students. Now I've just realized that may be spelt wrong. So perhaps with your dictionary at home, sometimes I have to use the dictionary as well. I think privileged, I'm unsure about that, and I'm not going to check on the computer, something that you could do at home, but I want to highlight if I'm not sure about my spelling. But Underprivileged is a much better word choice than poor. So one day a poor kid becomes a famous artist. So can become. Right, so what we have here is we have a modal. After a modal, we have a base verb. Right? So if we're not talking about the past, right? So modal and base verb. Again, that's just a grammar error. You just want to try and avoid those if you can. A famous artist, because the government spends a lot of money. So again, there's a lot of repetition here. So we've seen the word spend twice already, and that word was already given to you by the examiner. So a good rule of thumb is try not to reuse the keywords that are given to you by the examiner. So that's just a direct repetition. So it's good that there's a complex sentence being formed, but the second part of the sentence is a repetition of what's already said. It would be better just to get rid of that altogether, because it's probably worse to have a repetition than form a complex sentence. Better news for main body 2, because it is closer to the topic. Right, so let's move on to main body 2. Okay, I couldn't help myself, and I just had a look to see that the spelling for underprivileged was correct. Definitely, I was right the first time. I just wanted to make sure though. So, the main point, the main idea in this second main body paragraph is that art makes cities beautiful. Right. So, just move my screen up. So, much closer to the topic. Right, so when we're talking about beautification of cities, that is closer to the concept of the arts, right? The paragraph we just looked at was art as a subject in school, not really as closely related, but when we're talking about beautifying cities, I think that is much closer to the topic of the arts. Now, there's a good use of a cohesive device here. Sorry, I should also point out there's the same mistake. So art makes cities. And again, repetition of the same word, right? So instead of saying art makes cities beautiful, you just basically want to paraphrase that in a different way. So we're not using the same words again and again. So from the first main body paragraph, this candidate said, art makes people creative, and they've used the same structure again and the same word. Art makes cities beautiful. So art can create, or the arts, I would use the same term. The arts can create a more pleasant and visually pleasant and appealing city landscape or something like that, right? So anything to avoid using those same terms. Those are the things that I'm sure any examiner will notice straight away. The next thing I notice is straight away, the student is going into an example. The reason I recommend not doing this is because why are you giving an example for the topic sentence? To me, that shows straight away that there's not going to be a lot of content in this main body paragraph. So just to review our paragraph structure, we have a topic sentence. This is a main body paragraph. So we have a topic sentence. Then we have a supporting idea. Then we have evidence. Now, evidence can be an example or explanation. Right, and essentially we're going to have 2 to 3 of these. Right, so I think the topic sentence, apart from the vocabulary use and no different grammatical structure, the actual linking to the topic is good, and at least there is a topic sentence. So to me, in terms of the task responses, there's a clear central topic to this paragraph, which is good. But this is the main idea, and it needs to be supported, right? It can't just go straight to an example. So, for example, many cities have famous art museums. So, again, when I see this kind of thing, it's really clear that there hasn't been much planning or any planning put into the response. And it's quite likely that this candidate has just started writing straight away. This is the kind of thing that will happen, is you'll lose structure. So let's try and deconstruct this. So perhaps one supporting idea is, I'll do this in blue. How are cities more beautiful? Art museums. And the second thing I can see here is, even though it's misspelled, is graffiti. So again, I'm sure graffiti just has one T, but definitely not an I. The art museum thing is, I don't think it's the best supporting idea for the topic, or for the idea that cities are the arts make cities more beautiful, because art museums are just such a small part of a city. When I read that first sentence, I was thinking more along the lines of, I was thinking about, the buildings. Buildings could be artistic, or statues. But then, again, this is not really the best supporting idea, that the arts make cities beautiful. And this one here, possibly, some people do view graffiti as a form of art, but is it really the art that the examiner wants us to talk about? Probably not. So definitely better than the first main body paragraph, but I think quite a risky thing to try and develop, because not everybody would view graffiti as an art, and definitely not many people would see graffiti as the arts, right? So I'm just going to say it again. This is why, with this essay, it's much easier it's far easier to take this statement and agree with it, and then just talk about other things that are more important than the arts, whether that be health, education, transportation, other things that the government could spend money on. Focus on those. So if I were to give some more advice about the kind of topics or the ideas, then if the student really, really wanted to, just focus on the arts, these would be sort of my ideas. Culture, right? So what I mean by this is that often arts and culture are linked, right? So here in New Zealand in particular, we have minority people, a smaller group of people, the Māori people, and the majority people, they're called Pākehā, which is what I am, New Zealand Europeans. So most people agree that the government should definitely try and fund the arts of the Māori people because it helps keep their culture strong. And here in New Zealand, we want to keep the culture strong. So that might be one example where art and culture, there's a strong connection there. I think the beautification of cities is fine, but I wouldn't just focus on art museums. I would be looking at stuff like statues, right? And other kinds of visual arts. Maybe street performances. And when I start thinking about street performances, then I just maybe change my central idea, and I would probably talk about standard of living. Right, so when I brainstorm, I just get some ideas and I just keep changing them until I have a coherent sort of paragraph. So statues might be an example, and then what I do is here, this would be a supporting idea. Right, so this would be a topic, main body 1. This would be topic, main body 2. And then this is supporting idea. This is the second supporting idea, right? So if I were brainstorming and for the student, and say the student really, really wanted to keep writing about the arts, these might be some alternative ideas that he or she could have used. Let's finish up by having a look at the conclusion. Okay, hopefully you recognize this one as well, but this is a cohesive device to indicate a summary. You're not asked to give a summary in writing task 2 for IELTS. You're asked to give a conclusion. So say to conclude or in conclusion. Then you are signaling to the examiner that your conclusion comes next. Again, this signals to me that there's a summary. So just use one of these two. I think I usually go for in conclusion, but either of these are fine. So the government spends enough money on the arts. This is a word choice which is ambiguous. I like the fact that this student is trying to restate their position, but it needs to be clearer. So in conclusion, just make it much clearer. So the state, so we'll go for a synonym. Right, so instead of talking about enough, because it's really unclear exactly what the meaning is, this meaning here is much clearer. So in conclusion, the state does not need to cut funding for the arts. This is because it makes creative and beautiful city. So very repetitive, exactly the same keywords from the main body paragraphs. It's great that the actual conclusion is linking back. There's nothing new in here, which is a good thing. But again, this is where I would go for the same type of sentence. So I've used this one before. If I was the government. Right, so then what would you do if you're the government? We've already said that the government doesn't need to cut funding. I would reduce for other areas. To support sectors such as okay, the reason I have finished up with this kind of example at the end is to try to prove a final point that even for me, this is a really difficult conclusion to draw. Because, yeah, it's just I think what I would like to finish up by saying is the main issue that the student has had with this essay is that they have just chosen the wrong position to take. And from there, it's affected their vocabulary, range of vocabulary. They have kind of not had enough ideas to support their position. So that's why I think there's a lot of repetition. And even if I were to try and conclude the paragraphs or the essay for them, I find myself going back to the same ideas that perhaps health and education are other things the government might want to spend money on. So that is what I think the position, this is the position that this candidate should have taken, and the essay would have been much easier for him or her. So, but again, always want to thank the volunteers that send in their essays. I can see some evidence of some really nice structure. There's paragraphing happening here. All of those things are good, but if you didn't, just make sure you take some more time in the planning stage and always go for the easiest position, which you can use the most vocabulary to support. Once you start using more vocabulary, usually what happens next is, you'll start using more grammar as well. Conclusions will be easier to write. That is what I think would have been much easier for you. So, just want to talk about what's happening in the week ahead. For the grade subscribers, on Thursday, which is May the 21st, this is for grade subscribers. We're going to be looking at writing task 1, general. Right, so we're going to look at a letter. To do so, grade subscribers, go to the grade website. You'll see me back on the whiteboard on Thursday. On Sunday, which is May the 24th, there will be a replay on the grade Facebook page, and it should also be replayed on YouTube. That replay will be for writing task 2. So you'll see me going through someone else's essay. Now, if you watch the replay, there will be someone from grade who can answer your questions at that time. So this will be for writing task 2, replay. Then you'll see me live again next Tuesday, which is May the 26th, and that will be reading. And we're going to focus on another academic section, because one section from the academic reading test is essentially the same as section 3 from the general training reading test. Next Tuesday, when you see me, I'll be voicing over the actual grade website. We're going to look at another practice test from the grade website. So thank you so much again to the volunteer who has written this essay for me to have a look at. I hope the feedback I've given to you is still positive, because there are definitely positives there. Just always go for the easier option, and I'm sure the next essay you write will be much better. So hope to see you, grade subscribers, on Thursday, and everybody else, hope to see you live next Tuesday. Stay safe and have a great week.